fragile calm across the Middle East hangs in the balance. Washington has made a sudden high-stakes diplomatic move. President Donald Trump is dispatching two of his closest envoys to Pakistan for a second round of talks meant to revive a ceasefire and to test whether a path toward a more durable settlement with Iran is possible. The envoys are Steve Witkoff, the president's special envoy for peace missions, and Jared Kushner, a senior advisor and presidential family member who has returned to the diplomatic front lines. They travel to Islamabad at a moment when diplomacy and deterrence are being tested simultaneously and when the smallest misstep could send a region back to conflict. The White House says this trip is a narrow, urgent effort to keep negotiations alive. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, framed the deployment as a search for answers that only an in-person conversation can provide, while underlining Pakistan's role as an intermediary. Pakistani officials who have quietly been shepherding talks between the two sides will once again host what both sides hope will be practical, direct discussions. Islamabad's role is not incidental. It has been one of the few capitals trusted by both Washington and Tehran to carry messages and to facilitate meetings that would otherwise be impossible. On the Iranian side, Foreign Minister Abbas Araqi has been traveling across the region on a tightly scheduled tour. He announced he was embarking on a timely tour of Islamabad, Muscat, and Moscow. Purpose of my visits is to closely coordinate with our partners on bilateral matters and consult on regional developments of our neighbors are our priority. Those words, posted publicly by the foreign minister, make clear Tehran is pursuing a regional diplomatic track that runs in parallel to any direct engagement with the United States. Tehran's messaging has been careful. It is attentive to bilateral ties with neighbors while defensive about why suggestion that it is quietly capitulating to Washington's demands. Yet the public narrative from Tehran and the private realities on the ground do not always line up. Iran's state-aligned outlets, including the Tasnim news agency, pushed back against early reports of an immediate meeting between Iraqi and U.S. envoys in Pakistan, accusing some U.S. officials and media fabricating stories. That public skepticism underlines a deeper problem for negotiators. Even when senior figures move toward the same room, domestic politics and media narratives on both sides can complicate the smallest of gestures. President Trump's own remarks to reporters captured that tension, a mixture of tough-minded strategic language and an unmistakable awareness of Iran's internal instability. He described Iranian leadership as fractured, at times saying bluntly that they don't even know who's leading the country. If Tehran is perceived as divided and vulnerable, Washington can push harder in talks without appearing to bend. But Washington's public posture, particularly as articulated by the president, also makes clear what the United States insists on as the baseline for any agreement. As Trump put it in stark terms, we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. That phrase captures the core American demand, a binding, verifiable, long-term commitment that Iran will neither pursue a weapon nor maintain the capacity to assemble one on short notice. For U.S. negotiators, the term long-term is not a throwaway. Washington's hard line is designed to close the window on the rapid breakout scenarios that have haunted non-proliferation efforts for decades. This is not the first time a U.S. delegate, Ashton, has pressed that case in Islamabad. Vice President J.D. Vance led the first round of what came to be called the Islamabad talks, accompanied by Witkoff and Kushner. That initial round ended without a deal. In the immediate aftermath, the president said bluntly, "We have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news to the United States of America." Those words revealed two things. First, that the U.S. delegation believes it achieved clarity on its red lines, and second, that the administration wants to frame the failure to reach consensus as a problem for Tehran's credibility and security posture, not as a U.S. failure. Pakistan's engagement matters in practical terms. Islamabad has been working to re-inject momentum into the process, offering its capital as a neutral venue and providing back-channel access that neither side could easily use elsewhere. For the United States, Pakistan's cooperation opens a narrow diplomatic corridor. Tehran for Iran, Pakistan offers a place to coordinate with regional partners without direct exposure to the broader Western media glare. Islamabad, mindful of its own security vulnerabilities and regional relationships, has been careful to emphasize balance, mediating without appearing to take sides. Security measures in Islamabad have tightened as the diplomatic shuttle diplomacy continues, with senior delegations crossing borders and with the broader conflict still smoldering in other parts of the region. Pakistani authorities have tightened protection around diplomatic enclaves and transport routes. That is not simply theater. It is an operational recognition that making negotiations possible requires shielding them from online disinformation, from protesters who could inflame tensions, and from spoilers who might try to sabotage progress. Beyond the theater of negotiations, the substance at stake remains the same. What exactly will Iran commit to in duration and enforceable? DA. In return for whatever concessions the United States and its partners might offer, the U.S. position has focused on irreversible constraints and long-term guarantees. Tehran, by contrast, has emphasized its right to peaceful nuclear development and the need to restore economic normalcy. The public comments from Iranian officials emphasize regional coordination and neighborly ties while leaving open the possibility that direct rounds with Washington might occur or might not. The diplomatic calculus is complicated further by competing narratives at home. In Tehran, officials must manage a political spectrum that extends from hardline critics to pragmatic technocrats. Every public engagement risks triggering domestic backlash. Every public engagement risks triggering domestic backlash. In Washington, the administration must balance pressure from allies and domestic constituencies while making sure any concessions are defensible in the court of public opinion. That is why the president emphasized patience with the process. The president always wants to give diplomacy a chance. It's always his first option, and he's willing to do that here again. That sentence, delivered by senior officials in one form or another, frames the trip as a last best chance to resolve a fraught situation without renewed violence. Still, the skepticism voiced by Iran's media and its officials should not be dismissed. Tehran's state-aligned outlets pointedly suggested that claims of imminent meetings were premature, framing the narrative as one in which Washington, not Tehran, had misread the situation. Whether that is accurate or not, the effect is to raise the political temperature on both sides. Tehran cannot be seen domestically as simply yielding to U.S. pressure. Washington cannot be seen as being played. The role of Pakistan in this context is to lower the temperature by providing a controlled environment for direct exchange, an environment where each side can test signals and probe the other's red lines without the immediate pressure. Of an international summit, the question for negotiators is not simply whether a new round of talks can be convened. It is whether those talks can yield something concrete. A short ceasefire extension without rigorous verification will not satisfy critics who fear that pauses in fighting can be used to rebuild capacities. That fear was reflected in American rhetoric emphasizing long-term guarantees. Tehran, for its part, must reconcile the political costs of making binding concessions with the economic concessions with de-escalation. The arithmetic is delicate. Both sides want to avoid an all-out relapse into conflict, but neither wants to be seen as capitulating. On the margins, the trip will also test the influence of unofficial actors and former advisors who persist as power brokers even when not occupying formal offices. Jared Kushner's presence is emblematic of that dynamic. As a senior advisor and as someone with personal ties to the president, he is part of a team that put it at mixes official authority with personal diplomacy. Steve Witkoff, tasked with a special envoy role, is the administration's point man for shuttle diplomacy, a role that requires equal parts logistical coordination, political rapport, and a tolerance for ambiguous outcomes. If this round of talks produces any forward movement, it will likely be incremental, confidence-building measures, clear timelines for inspections, or limited reciprocal steps that can be verified. If it fails, the political fallout will be immediate. For Tehran, a failure could harden domestic factions and increase the risk of brinkmanship. For Washington, a failed effort could force difficult choices about whether to maintain the current pressure campaign or to pursue other, possibly riskier instruments of statecraft. The stakes extend beyond Washington and Tehran. Regional neighbors from Islamabad to Muscat to Moscow, cities that Iraqi plans to visit, have deep and overlapping concerns about stability. A durable pause in hostilities would ease pressure on global supply chains, on refugee flows, and on energy markets. A collapse of talks, by contrast, would ripple through markets and could trigger cascading security commitments from allied states. For now, the immediate picture is direct, narrow, and urgent. U.S. narrow and urgent. U.S. Axco's envoys are traveling to Islamabad to meet with Pakistani interlocutors and to seek a pathway for direct dialogue with Iranian representatives. Tehran's public posture remains cautious and conditioned by both domestic concerns and a regional diplomatic circuit. Washington has outlined clear conditions, an affirmative long-term commitment not to pursue a nuclear weapon and to dismantle any quick breakout capabilities, and has sent senior envoys to press those demands. Even as the diplomats move, the war of words continues. Skeptics on both sides say that gestures of negotiation can mask real strategic competition. Advocates argue that even small spaces for face-to-face diplomacy are preferable to open conflict, and so the negotiators will try in the coming days to convert cautious language into confidence-building steps. They will test whether mutual suspicion can be narrowed into tangible agreements that protect civilians, reduce the risk of nuclear proliferation, and restore a measure of predictability in a region that has already endured far too much chaos. The next round of talks will be watched closely in capitals across the world. If Islamabad succeeds in providing a bridge, a controlled environment for disclosure, verification, and compromise, the diplomatic path may lengthen. If it fails, the consequences are hard to overstate. A return to kinetic escalation, a strain on global markets, and a renewed scramble for military and economic postures across the region. In the meantime, officials on both sides and their Pakistani hosts will be acutely aware of how fragile any progress will be. The balance between diplomacy and deterrence, between domestic politics and international obligations, is narrow. One misstep, one misstatement, or one miscalculation could undo weeks of careful mediation. That is the reality facing negotiators as envoys leave for Islamabad, a reality in which words, movements, and gestures are measured not only for their immediate effect, but for their ripple effects days and weeks down the line. What happens next may not be decided in a single press briefing or a single meeting room. It will be decided by a series of cautious, often technical steps. Who sits at the table, what is shared, and when, how inspections are defined, and whether guarantees can be made binding and verifiable. Those are the details that will determine whether the fragile pause evolves into a durable truce or whether the region slips once more into a wider confrontation. As diplomats prepare to test those limits, the world watches, hoping that this round of shuttle diplomacy will yield enough traction to keep the guns silent and to buy time for a longer political settlement. The next days in Islamabad will tell us whether the painstaking work of intermediaries and envoys can translate into something more lasting than words on a page.